I'm sure that most of us have heard the term old fashioned values, but what are they? And are they even important or relevant in our modern day? Are they just archaic? Using the word old often brings a somewhat negative connotation, but should it always? Are there some things that are old that we've left behind that we may want to revisit? Perhaps we've walked away from something or forgotten some things that are truly important, and perhaps some of these things are just not as common as they once were. Today, I'm starting a series where we'll take a look at old fashioned values. I'm encouraging you to keep an open mind and not discount information because it's wrapped in a term like old. Today, I'm going to get us started by giving an intro on some of these values, and then each week in the series, we'll take a look at these values in more detail. Let's be clear, I'm definitely not suggesting that we just assume that everything that is old is automatically good and everything that is new is bad, as though we assume that people of the past had pure intentions and that, we just return to the good old days. That also doesn't mean that some of the time tested ways are not worth revisiting and learning from. We can't go back, and I'm not even suggesting that, but we can learn from the past to help us go forward in a better manner. Before we dig in more, let's first get some general definitions on some important terms that apply to this discussion, like morals and values. First, morals tend to be more culturally defined or impacted. A moral is basically a general sense or a rule or a principle that guides what's right and wrong, and they usually have a definition that comes from a particular culture, a social structure, family, or institutions that we might be a part of. Values, on the other hand, are a bit more personal. Where a moral may have a definition of what's right and wrong in a general sense, a value will be more personal, where the individual can own a sense of why they hold that belief or why they feel it to be true. So, when we're talking about old fashioned values, we're really likely talking about some overlapping of morals and values that guided and impacted our society over time. For the sake of our discussion, we'll just call them old fashioned values. So, what are they? Well, they're the values, the ideas, the customs, the way things were done and still are in some cases with regard to ethics, the attitudes that were embodied, and the way people and situations were approached. They're the values that have really stood the test of time to the benefit of previous generations. And that's really key here because time will tell if how we are functioning now will be good for us and what the impact will be in our world in both a broad sense and a personal sense. These values are beliefs or practices or customs, if you will, that were passed down from generation to generation and really woven into parts of our culture. But why are these values even important? Aren't we progressing? Haven't we moved beyond old ways of doing things? Aren't we smarter and in a place where we don't really need to learn from these ways? Haven't we evolved? Maybe a sample of what I'm talking about might actually be helpful. Think about what our world offers and demands. In a culture of selfies that seems to encourage putting ourselves first, and at times even seems to glorify stepping on someone to get ahead, values like integrity, self-sacrifice, maybe even modesty seem to be insignificant or even irrelevant. But are they? I imagine that all of us would like to be respected. But then, shouldn't we be respectful? Or if we long for others to deal with us in integrity, wouldn't it make sense for us to be an honorable individual? What would happen if we saw an increase in our culture of values like patience, accountability, courage, kindness, discipline, loyalty, responsibility, or gratitude? I mean, seriously, imagine what that might do to our environment around us if ourselves and others began to increasingly act out of that kind of nature. Honestly, I think it's foolish not to learn from the past, good or bad. The past is there for us to take an example from and see clearly what their actions produced in their lives, in the world around them. A society of old fashioned values was not perfect by any means. And that's really not what I'm getting at here. But if we're honest with ourselves, we have to admit that culturally, things seem to be unraveling and degrading a bit. None of these points, in and of themselves are the answer to a culture that seems to have lost its way, but they can help to provide a bedrock of a functioning society to build upon. I hope you'll journey with me as we take a look at these old fashioned values over the next several weeks. Thanks for joining me today for A Word to the Wise. My name is Doug Ebertowski. If this has been helpful for you, maybe consider subscribing to this channel and give it a like and maybe even share the video. Also, connect with me over on my website, awordtothewise.co.co, and maybe even consider checking out some of my other videos. Until next time, be wise.